What's up, metal and heavy music fans? Today we are ranking the albums of Whitechapel.
What is the purpose of living a lie? These days we feel to succumb to the eyes. Madness!
And hey, if you like to be kept up to date with the best and brightest metal bands and albums from the underground and above, then stick with me by hitting that subscribe button down below. Yes, finally following up the Suicide Silence tier list with a Whitechapel tier list, and let's just dive right into it with the Somatic Defilement in 2007. This is a decent album and actually deserves some extra recognition for being one of the formative albums to even just establishing deathcore to begin with. It's their only album on Candlelight too, before moving to Metal Blade, and also the only one with Brandon Cagle on guitars. Cagle. It's mostly a concept album about Jack the Ripper with some other stuff thrown in, which, by the way, you probably know this if you clicked on the video, but that's partially where their name comes from. Definitely not my favorite, and especially listening back to them now, honestly, some of these older albums, just considering how much deathcore has evolved in the past decade or so, they feel a little bit quaint. And also, when it comes to debuts, I prefer Suicide Silence's The Cleansing, which came out this same year, but I'm still going to give this one a B. Alright, and then this is Exile in 2008. Definitely an improvement over the debut on all levels, I would say. The production is better, the just guitar sound, the songwriting. Some banger tracks on here too. The title track, Possession, Demon, The Procreated, Messiahbolical, what a great title for that one too. The Possession music video actually got some solid rotation too on Headbangers Ball. And it hit Billboard Top 200 at 118, which is pretty impressive for a sophomore effort from a deathcore band. Again, when the genre is still kind of in its formation at this point. Still not quite hitting the top tiers for me. It's a little inconsistent. There's some kind of filler sounding tracks. I'm going to also put this one at B, but a little bit higher. All right, the New Era of Corruption in 2010. This one shot up to number 43 on Billboard, and for good reason. You can hear them becoming stronger songwriters for sure on this album, and a lot of different ways, just tighter, stronger. The whole album feels a little bit more consistent. And then you've got some standout moments too. Chino Moreno of Deftones and Vincent Bennett of the Acacia Strain make guest appearances. Program to Hate is definitely my personal favorite on the entire album. Great song. But also End of Flesh and Unnerving. I really like this album art too. Definitely hear them coming into their own at this point. I'm going to put this one at A. And then Whitechapel in 2012. Honestly, I like this simple saw blade cover kind of the most out of their entire discography. Just something about it. It really makes a statement. And sometimes bands put out a self-titled later on in their career and it feels like sort of a throwaway thing, but this one does feel like a culmination of everything up to this point fully coming to fruition, seeing them with like a clear path forwards. And I gotta say, every track is a banger. This one's very consistent, and I know I already said the last one was much more consistent, but this one, front to back, really, really solid. Personal favorites though, Make It Bleed, Hate Creation, and especially Culturalist, one of my all-time favorite Whitechapel songs. This has been my personal favorite album for a long time now, and people may wonder sometimes what is like the criteria for me for like a great album. And there's a lot of things that go into it, but put simply, there's really kind of like two main factors. One, every single song is really solid. It's that consistency factor. It's not just like, I know some people are like, but dude, it's got like their best song on it, so it's their best. It's like, no, that's not enough. Like, it's got to be all the way through, front to back. There's really no duds, and then also it still has those like standout moments too. But anyways, based on me gushing on this, you probably already guessed, I'm going to put this one at S tier. All right, then we have our Endless War in 2014. Now, unfortunately, after the self-titled, I feel like they kind of peaked, for me at least, a bit. I find this album to be fine, but also just kind of bland and unengaging. There are exceptions, of course. You gotta love that infectious groove of The Saw Is the Law. Almost Meshuggah vibes on that one. Let Me Burn has a banger intro, but the song itself is still pretty dull to me. Diggs Road has some great dark atmosphere and a great solo on it as well. There are also some fun little like rapid fire vocal moments that tend to get me going. But overall, I think that this was around the time that we were collectively realizing that the original deathcore formula was getting kind of stale. So I'm going to put this one at C tier. And then Mark of the Blade 2016. So this was the first Whitechapel album I actually reviewed for Metal Trenches in written form, and it just really, fell short for me on all levels. I remember being kind of excited when I got the promo for it, because this was still in the early days of the site and like me like actually getting stuff from major labels to listen to early, and then just feeling totally let down. It does have some good moments like The Void and the title track, but ultimately it's just very mediocre. A lot of people seem to be having a divisive response to the implementation of the clean vocals, but for me, that was never the issue. Like, I even had people kind of like attacking me, being like, oh, you just don't like it because they've got clean vocals. I love clean vocals. I like a ton of bands that mix in cleans or do only cleans. But for me, it had a lot to do with just the songwriting and the production. Like, the songs are just very uninspired, unmemorable, and then the production is just super flat and lacks any sort of energy or impact, which just sucks even more of the life out of it. The guitars sound so compressed that it's like robbed of any sort of punishment that I'm used to when it comes to Whitechapel. All around, just awful. It's just a really awful album. I'm going to put it at D tier. But then we have The Valley in 2019. So, at this point, I think that Whitechapel were sort of teetering on the verge of becoming irrelevant, and I think they sensed that and also the need for a change. They've even gone on record in interviews saying that they're not particularly proud of Mark of the Blade. So yeah, I think they really wanted to like step things up and make a change for the Valley, and that they did. Now, I will admit that I am one of the like 5 people in the world who did not love this album and absolutely rave about it. Like, even to this day, I talk to people, it was like, oh, the Valley, oh, it was a great, like, album of the year. And I'm like, it was fine. Like, I still don't really see what all the fuss is about, even coming back and re-listening to it now. I'm like, maybe I was just wrong, but I turned it on and I was just like, yeah, no, I feel the same way that I did. But that doesn't mean I don't deeply respect it and some of the ballsy decisions that they made here. So first off, I love the cover art. It's definitely among their best, and it gives off strong kind of like giallo horror vibes to me for things like Suspiria and Deep Red. It's got that Argento energy. And then just telling such a personal story comes through very genuinely, especially in the vocals. The singing on here is very strong and actually a little bit like of a tearjerker at times. And then the heavy parts are still super heavy and very atmospheric. Production is back where it needs to be. It's like the polar opposite of the last album, where that one felt all like squished and shrunken down. This one feels big. Black Bear has another nice groove. We Are One has some really sick drumming and more of a technical approach. Definitely a standout for me there. And then Doomwoods is a really solid closer with that slow kind of bluesy guitar. So even though I don't love it, I still think that objectively speaking, it deserves a higher rating than especially the first 2 albums. I'm going to put it at an A, but if I was just grading it on its own in a review, I think it's more of a B. So now it's the moment many of you have been waiting for, the much anticipated follow-up to The Valley, Kin, in 2021. So first off, Phil's clean singing is becoming much more of a pervasive element here, but I will say that he sounds better than ever in those parts, and he's also managing to avoid the poppier tropes of many of their peers. It thankfully still doesn't have that same glossy, overprocessed sound of things like Sleep Token and Architects. Anti-Cure, History is Silent, and Kin have straight up ballad portions that wouldn't be out of place on like a Stone Sour record. I think that's easily the closest comparison here. But then certain moments on Without Us and especially Orphan even slip into an almost Nickelback or like Three Doors Down kind of energy. Or I was even thinking of Default. You remember Default? And yeah, it caught me off guard a little bit, but it's not all that surprising when remembering that these guys are from Knoxville, Tennessee. But I know that this is going to be the element that once again divides the fan base. If you still just want some of that heavy, you can still get plenty of it with tracks like Lost Boy, A Blood-Soaked Symphony, and To the Wolves. And I Will Find You is a super banger of an opening track, definitely my favorite of the entire album. It's got this like acoustic opening and strangely kind of like folk metal vibes. It almost sounds like something off of an Ensiferum or even like a Bellacore album rather than a deathcore record. I would love to hear more of this in the future, so if you guys happen to watch this, like, that's the next thing. I'd be interested in the comments if other people feel the same way about that track. But on a final positive note, the production of this album is again very solid. Now, Pair Jeans was saying that this is actually worse than Mark of the Blade on his first listen, but I gotta give some points here and credit where it's due in terms of the bravery that went into some of the decision making here. And Deathcore Goes Country is an interesting idea, but ultimately, this is another album I don't really see myself going back to much in the future. But I do think it's better than Mark of the Blade, the production is stronger, the songwriting is more interesting, there's more chances taken, so I'm going to put it at C tier. But let me know down in the comments, how would you rank these albums? Let me know where we agree and where we disagree. And then stick around, I got plenty more tier lists in this playlist that you can check out from many other bands. Again, I mentioned like Suicide Silence. And subscribe also for album reviews and other videos. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.